Board games. Board games is what we're talking about, as well as RPGs. Board games, board games. I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing, and look over there and you'll happen upon the person whose name is Dragon, and they are today joining me to talk about many podcasts and not just Penance RPG. We're going to be talking about what are these things and why do none of them do much of singing. Board games and RPG podcasts is what we're talking about. Board games and RPG podcasts. I'm not going to shout. Hello, everyone, and good morning. And how are you today, Dragon?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad. And hello, Xate. It is lovely to see you. As people might be aware, it is 10 a.m. UK time. Wherever you are, it might be bedtime. It might be breakfast time. You know, whatever time it is in the country when you're watching this, it could be bath time. So we're calling this the Busy Bath Time Board Game Bladder. And today we are talking about RPG podcasts with Dragon of Penance RPG. And, you know, full disclosure, we met at a couple of shows. I can't remember which ones, but the one that I really remember having a whole bunch of interaction was that Tabletop Scotland.
Yes, I think Tabletop Scotland might have been the first one.
Mm-hmm. So I remember like having a chat with you and...
Oh no, I know where it was. It was the Glasgow Games Festival.
Oh, that was such... Oh yeah, unfortunately, of course, these are all things that are not happening in 2020 because, hey, but that's going to be just the theme of the show for the next few months for another half a year or a year, I don't know how. But anyway, back to the point. Glasgow Games Festival, lovely thing, run by Nick Pittman in the heart of Glasgow in an actual concert hall. And when I say it's an actual concert hall, it's kind of above the concert hall, really. It's not where people would actually perform, but it's still pretty classy. You get nice tables and stuff. Anyway, it was quite a small convention, 200 people, but then we have had a bit of a chat. We've shared a drink in the sadly now gone Lucky Sparrow Cafe, which is a very sad casualty. Lovely people. Tabletop Board Games Cafe, where also I think it was it Kath or Sadie who ran Dungeons and Dragons for people, and
I think it was Sadie that DM'd for them, yeah.
But, oh man, this is not off to the cheeriest start.
I know.
We have enjoyed some games together, and we will probably enjoy some games together again one day. And yes. I am having Dragon on because she is running a wonderful actual play podcast, co-running, let's say.
Yeah.
Called Penance RPG, and it's like, yeah, this is an entire world that I just do not understand. What's going on here? This is kind of like when Dina comes on and Dina just tells me about what marketing even means. And hello, Alex. It's lovely to see you. And just kind of getting together and saying, what are these things? What kinds of RPG podcasts are there? Because, I mean, interestingly, RPGs are something you can do an actual play podcast of, where I've not heard anyone do an audio description of board games being played. I mean, maybe that would be an interesting thing. I don't know if you did good enough audio description. Oh.
That's a good idea. We've done audio description of some card games before.
Oh, have you?
Yes. There's a game called Champion of the Wild.
Oh, yes.
So we've done a couple of episodes of playing that. It actually translates really easily to audio. because it's mostly a discussion and voting game. And we seem to have an obsession with having animals as part of the podcast. Just, it's not deliberate.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Like any game where you're, doing an audio description of Manhattan Project or Agricola or whatever, would be a lot to keep on your mind.
But it would be a lot to juggle.
An audio description of, actually now I think about it, James Cook. You know James Cook, who does the board game Hunt Smackdown, I want to say. And I'm chatting to them to have them on, a comedian who actually ran it at Edinburgh Fringe and then had some audio shows. But it's interesting how certain games do tend well just because they are all about the negotiation and the chatting.
Yeah. Anything that isn't purely about where you put things on the board could probably be done with audio description.
Now, what I was going to, I'm still working out 200 episodes in, and I'm still working out what order the things go in. But let's start off, before we get into the proper introductions with the questionably quick questions, let's talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. So what have you been enjoying recently? Yesterday, I did a lot of walking. I'm quite proud of that. I went off. I did a sort of sit walk, had a mask on with McCall. We were walking around, trundled along parks that we'd never been to before and along streets that we'd never seen before. And then I did a bit more walking whilst I was talking to a sort of dates that I've had 2 dates with since we met in March. Anyway, so we were chatting and then I was walking around and then I saw this fence and it was painted like in a rainbow color, which was pretty cool. Someone had just this fence in their front garden, which I never walked past there before. I don't know if I'll be able to find it again, but maybe I will. And so I'll be hunting around kind of a little bit south of my house, about 10 minutes away. And I was just walking in circles and I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. But yeah, that is my recent highlight. How about you?
Ooh. See, it's difficult because I don't tend to go out very much. So actually, in that way, pandemic lockdown hasn't really affected me that badly. It's affected everyone else around me, but, you know, I can't go out most days anyway, so it's fine. Recent highlights. I'm trying to think of something that's not podcast related.
I mean, you can talk about your podcast if that's a highlight. I mean, quite often I say, you know what, yeah, like chatting to Chris earlier, even though it was interrupted by McCall cutting off a bit of finger, but hopefully within 2 weeks, it might take 2 weeks to heal. But anyway, like, chatting on my show, like this is a recent highlight of my day. But like if you want to big up, your show and the, connections that you make and playing games on your show, like go for it. What is your recent highlight? And
there's a system that we got a chance to play when they were just before they went on Kickstarter. And I got to run a 7 or 8 episode mini campaign from them recently, which was lots of fun. Slightly scary, but sometimes doing the things that are slightly scary is really good for you. So.
And what's the name of the system? Would you like to give it a shout out?
It is Endless Realms by a company called Lunar Games.
And so you enjoyed playing with this 7 times?
Yes, it was lots of fun. And I enjoy getting, because the world they've made is totally different from some of the bigger names like D&D or Pathfinder. So it just has such a different feel and different creatures that live there. It was lovely to get a chance to explore something that just might look kind of similar at the start and then has a totally different feel to it.
Aww. I mean, it's all about the details, isn't it? And I mean, I don't do 20% as much role playing as you do, I think. I don't, but yes, I mean, it's definitely an interesting conversation potentially about what amount the GM brings to it and what amount the players bring to it and what amount the system brings to it. I guess it's kind of a similar question with board games, like what amount does the board game contribute and what amount does the game contribute?
Yeah, the feeling isn't that dissimilar. Certainly as a player, it feels it's definitely like a comfortable role if you're used to playing board games. Or yeah, really anything tabletop as a player has a like broadly the same sort of feel to it. Running an RPG can feel a lot more stressful to start with. But it's not that different really from having a single player, like if you have a single player run a board, because it's like some board games have a lot of elements that need to be moved every turn or whatever it is. It kind of feels the same. So
a quick good morning to Yellow Pigeon. It's lovely to have you with us. Other people talking about their own highlights. Alex did musical clues for Decrypto, and they didn't tank the game. I looked and sounded pretty rough, says Alex, but I did it anyway. A highlight. And Sate says, recent highlight turns out to not work. I recorded a triumphant tradition of I Will Survive wearing my wedding dress for this week's Twitch Sings Night, but the file somehow didn't save. So it sounds like singing it was a highlight, even if it didn't manage to save. But that does sound like you had a lot of fun at least doing it. Looking up Aqua's stuffy nose while Aqua did the musical clues for Decrypto was fun. Alex has a great voice, even with a cold, sorry. And I danced too, says Xate, starting near the camera. You couldn't see the dress in the first bit, dancing backwards, showing the dress, then putting on a punk leather jacket in the other person's bit and dancing wildly. And this is, for those who are just tuning in, this is, the time when Xate's ex left them. So, yeah. 5th anniversary and last is this Thursday. There you go. In Germany, apparently, you need to be separated for something like a year before you get properly divorced. So it's quite a long, drawn-out process. Which I guess has good elements and bad elements. But, yeah. Was not well sung, but it was triumphant. Practically yelling the last I will survive at the camera. And so, yep. But, yeah, that sounds like everyone's been able to have some amounts of fun in these difficult times. So let's get on with the questionably quick questions. And let's start off. I'm going to put you in the hot seat. And there we go. So now you are in the hot seat, Dragon. And now, if anyone has any questions over the next 10 minutes-ish, we'll speak to Dragon. And first of all, I want to ask, where exactly in the world are you? And what time is it where you are?
I am in Glasgow, Scotland. So it is 10:15 a.m. for me.
And yeah, we both have this connection with Glasgow. Did you, like me, grow up with Glasgow? Do you love Glasgow?
Yes. I grew up in a small town, fairly close to Glasgow. It's actually halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, but like the cultural connection was always with Glasgow. It was also a lot easier to get to, which helps.
Xates really wants to know, would you rather be a pigeon or a shark for one day?
Shark.
Hmm.
It's a lot more, well, I suppose it depends on the type of shark, but it's a lot more difficult to get down to the depths of the ocean than it is to fly.
Oh, so you're saying that as a human, you could imagine yourself in a helicopter or something? Is
Yeah.
that what you're thinking?
Yep. Whereas being at the bottom of the ocean and not drowning or necessarily having issues with the pressure would be amazing.
I mean, would it be a baby shark or a full-grown adult shark?
Adult shark.
Yeah, I think you
The
want to
babies
have...
stay in the shallows.
Yeah, that defeats the whole point. I mean, come on, Alex, weren't you listening? Okay, I want to ask about archaeology. And what
Okay.
is archaeology? I mean, you studied this at university. Like, was this a lifelong passion when you were a wee lass?
I was always interested in like historical sites. It was something we visited a lot as a family. And essentially I got to, when I was in 6th year at school, which is the final year in Scotland, equivalent to upper 6th form in England, I think. I went to university open day and saw that archaeology was an option, and I just kind of jumped at it. Completely impulsive. It is the study of the human past through items and structures, the physical remains largely.
Wait, so archaeology is actually all about the studying. It's not actually all about going and brushing things on dig sites.
Without the studying, there isn't much point going and doing the excavation. We do have, in the 70s, we started having rescue excavations when there were some of the really large infrastructure projects, which then they were, if they came across archaeology, they didn't need to do anything about it. They could just destroy it and carry on their construction. So we've brought in a system where the developer pays for any archaeology that's required on that site.
The developer?
So if someone's building houses, when they first break ground on that site, they have to have an archaeologist there. Just to make sure that there's nothing being destroyed.
Okay. So a quick good morning to Alan in chat. It's lovely to have you.
Morning.
Say it's a very RPG-inspired question. If people from a fantasy world were role-playing about being humans in the 21st century, how would they describe the character stats to play as you?
I think some of them would probably be the classic ones, like strength, constitution, dexterity. But I think you would also need something like sarcasm.
Special
for me in
traits.
particular. What else would there be?
I mean, what would be your highest stats and what would be your lowest stats, would you say? I mean, I feel like...
Strength would be lowest. Now, strength would be lowest. And probably sarcasm would be one of the highest. My friends always say that they know when I'm like properly ill, is when the cheekiness stops. So that's usually the tell.
And
oh, I have to give numbers. Okay. On a broadly D&D sort of level, strength would be base 10. Con would probably only be maybe 13, which isn't horrendous, it's just not great. And dexterity, my dexterity varies wildly with my disability. So it could be anything between 10 and 17. Sarcasm, 18.
And a quick morning to Jay Foolsguard. It's lovely to see you. And morning to Afterworlds. It's lovely to have you join us, who says that responsibility is der dump stat.
That is probably a stat you would need for real life roleplay, yes.
Alex asks, what is the best fruit in your opinion? I mean,
I'm going to go with lemon, with the caveat that I can't eat fruit.
What?
Yeah.
You physically cannot eat fruit?
Along with my other conditions, I also have some really bizarre like food intolerances. And if I eat fruit, I tend to end up like curled up in pain for the rest of the day.
Okay.
So,
I know...
that does include, I mean, it's better if they're cooked, but it includes the ones that we use as vegetables as well. So like cucumbers, quite bad. Bell peppers are usually okay.
Really badly to sugar, and even tomatoes have too much sugar for them, and it will send their blood into a spike, and it will mess them up for, you know, it will really mess them up for like a day, I think. Is that similar? Is that the situation with you, that you just can't handle sugars?
My body just can't handle something about them. Don't necessarily know what it is, because intolerances don't show up in any tests. But yeah, I just need to avoid them in all their forms.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, why did you have to stop archaeology? You mentioned your disabilities, and yeah, how was that? I mean, are you? Yeah, I struggle to kind of yeah, I don't want to like dig up old wounds, but how are you feeling about it? Are you feeling quite, yeah, that's what it is? Are you feeling quite okay about things?
I'm pretty comfortable with it now. It was initially more difficult. So I first became ill when I was about 13, 14. So I knew that doing commercial archaeology and excavations was not going to be a long-term career. I just didn't expect it to get cut quite as short as it did. So I managed about 3.5 years in commercial archaeology. And then I woke up one day and I couldn't use my arms.
Wow.
So yeah, I had to finish that contract early because I just couldn't. And there wasn't a spinal injury that was causing it. It seems to be that it was just the conditions were flaring up.
And so this is something that previously you were unaware of, but...
Certainly the severity of it took me massively by surprise. After that, I was bedbound for about 6 months.
Wow.
That was 6 years ago.
And is that something that flares up from time to time? Are there particular ways or techniques that you've learned to manage this?
About the only thing you can do, I should probably say what it is. It's not MS, thankfully. It's ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which has been renamed as chronic fatigue syndrome. But I also have some other kind of autoimmune conditions. So I've got fibromyalgia, I get Raynaud syndrome, which means that your hands and feet randomly stop getting blood circulation, which is lots of fun if you're working outside in winter. And like I said, some of the food intolerances are probably linked in with that, and I'm allergic to dairy. About the only thing you can do for most of these is try to not exhaust yourself, essentially. So it's just learning how best to pace using your energy.
Well, I guess that is it. It's like the whole spoon theory of what do you actually do. And so, yeah, thank you very much for giving your energy to us. And Xate in chat says they are seeing doctors to see what their chronic pain, what her chronic pain is. Might be fibromyalgia also. And Xate, onto slightly more happier things. What's the weirdest dream you remember?
I don't usually remember dreams. One of the few dreams, well, I suppose nightmare, that I remember really well was when I was little, and I was convinced that there were snakes like going around the top of the walls in my room. I don't know how they were clinging onto the walls, but there were apparently snakes up there, and I was convinced that they were there as soon as the lights went out.
So you were convinced that, was this like a waking dream, or was it?
No, I was asleep. It was one that I retained really strongly when I woke up.
Oh, wow. And so, yeah, kind of waking up from this nightmare and be like, oh my God, all these snakes are on the ceiling.
Yep.
How long did it take you to realize, hey, wait a minute, no, I don't see anything?
I'm not sure. I think I was quite young at this point. I was probably only about 4 or 5. So the only thing I really remember strongly is there were snakes, and I could see them as dark shapes moving.
Oh, it's kind of weird how when everything is dark, our imagination runs away with us, which is probably a good sign in many ways, that we have that imagination, that we can imagine things as people or monsters, and that taps into the ability to tell stories or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think that the last question that the people might want me to ask you is, would you rather have a meeple-sized duck or a duck-sized meeple? So a tiny little
duck-sized meeple.
Oh, so you wouldn't want to have a tiny little duck squawking along. You'd rather have a big chunk of wood that's bigger than your head, and you can... What would you do with it? Use it as a doorstop? Use it as a giant start player marker? Hit your enemies with it?
Use it as a giant start player marker, or if you have... sometimes at some conventions you've got like the giant versions of games where you like step onto the points. I'd use it for that.
Oh, so like what you really want is a giant like Carcassonne or something, which takes the entire UK Games Expo
that would be amazing.
Like imagine if it took up like an entire hall.
Wow. That would be amazing, and it would take so long to play.
It would also be seriously impractical, because you wouldn't be able to see
what else is going on.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to keep it all in your mind even. Like, it feels like you would want to have some sort of ladder system where you can go up these steps and kind of survey everything. And yeah. Excuse me, could you lift your demo table for a sec? I need to place this road. And I'm just imagining that Asmodee's bought
they don't get
one
demo
entire
tables.
Hall. Yeah, one entire hall. Like it's just one entire go to Essen Hall 8, just dedicated to Carcassonne. Alan talks about possible stats, needing charisma, number of followers on Instagram, dexterity, time to put an IKEA calyx together, constitution is number of trips to the loo after a late night kebab. And oh my gosh, hello Jolin, it is lovely to see you. And thank you very much for joining us. We are just now finishing up the questionably quick questions, as we are going to be talking about what RPG podcasts are all about. And now we are going to be talking about brilliant thing, brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? And I'm going to talk about podcasts in general. And I just think that podcasts are brilliant. Like, you can walk around, you can listen to something. Maybe you don't always want to have someone on the phone. Maybe you just want to be in your own world, but you don't want to fully embrace everything going on. You want to keep your mind going a little bit, so you listen to a podcast. Or maybe you're drifting off to sleep, but you want something to keep your mind occupied, so why not put on a podcast? Or maybe you're doing some washing up, or maybe you're doing all sorts of things. You can listen to a podcast. I just think they're brilliant. What would you say about podcasts? And do you agree that they're brilliant? I mean, you make one, so I hope you do. I mean, but why are podcasts brilliant? Let us know in the comments.
Much the same reasons. I tend to be always doing something. I don't do well if my hands aren't doing a thing. So I tend to be listening to things as I move around. As you say, doing chores. It's definitely helpful for that. I have a tendency to dissociate if my brain isn't working. So I completely lose track of time. So yeah, podcasts are really useful, and they're an awful lot more cheerful than the news has been recently.
Oh my gosh, yes. And like, hello, Nicholas, and who says BBBB is brilliant. Thank you very much. I know that some people, including sometimes Alan, listen to it just on audio after the time. So yeah, I try to read out the things. And thank you, everyone who does that. And yeah, thank you for the lovely words, Jolyn. And like, I think we can all appreciate all those people who put out great content. My ones that I've recently been listening to, I did listen to a bit of Penance, just in preparation for this. I was like, yeah, I've got to know what. But I also listened to a bit of On Board Games recently, which I love. It's one of the earliest board game podcasts I've ever listened to. Do you know this one, On Board Games? It started off by Scott Nicholson, who was like the OG. They were the first person to ever make video reviews of board games, pretty much. And then, like, if you look at them now, they're almost laughable how bad the video quality is. But, you can still see that there's something really solid going on here. And Scott Nicholson did so much for the industry, to my mind. And then Scott Nicholson, Dom, and Eric Dewey sets up this thing, which is still going 700-800 episodes later, which is kind of crazy. And my other ones that I want to give a shout out to are Ludology podcast. That is brilliant. I love that one. That's like the OG let's talk about how you make a game podcast. What's your favorite podcast? I also want to there's Mentally Yours, which I quite like, and also The Guilty Feminist. I'm a big fan of that one, which is a comedy show where they also tackle subjects. But even that one, in recent days, I've just wanted to ignore that, because even that, it's like, yeah, another source of frustration about the world. Let's just hear how good life is, and let's listen to some music. Let's hear some people being cheerful. Let's enjoy some board games, because that's just, yes, I'm not going to say we can't have board games that are about serious things like Holding On. I think that's amazing, but let's hear something more about the entertainment. And Scott Nicholson is the OG indeed, says Games by Emmanuel. Lovely to see you. And how do you approach new podcasts? Do you go back to the very first? I mean, personally, I would start off by listening to maybe 2 or 3 and being like, okay, is this something that I do actually want to listen to? And then I'll pick off 2 or 3, which I think, okay, this seems like a good introduction, because it's, especially if you're into hundreds of episodes, it's going to mutate a lot. And so I would say that's how I approach it. Pick a couple, and then if I'm like, yep, I'm listening to this, then I listen to everything. How do you approach it?
I would say it depends on what sort of podcast it is. If it is a storytelling podcast, including actual plays, audio dramas, anything that has an ongoing story from one episode to the next, quite a lot of the longer ones will have different series, especially with actual play podcasts. So we have nearly 270 episodes, but that's broken up into, so there's some one-shots which are just single standalone episodes, or we'll have different series of different lengths, which either have they have a different game that we're playing, or it's in a different sort of setting. So our original was fantasy, and then the one that we started this year is kind of futuristic, kind of Shadowrun cyberpunk in feel. But yeah, generally I'd want to pick something that's a standalone or a shorter series to listen to, because then you know if you want to put the amount of time and effort into going back to episode 1. And I'll be honest, quite a lot of podcasts would be happier if you didn't start at episode 1, because there's always audio issues when you first start. Just always.
I mean, this show, like, it's got the same, like, I keep the numbering system, but it's changed so much from, like, the start to how it is now. And at the start, it was like, okay, it's just me in front of a screen and I'm reviewing a game, or sometimes I'm doing an Ask Me Anything. And it took me so long until I had my first guest on, and then it was Richard Denning, and then I invited all these other people, and now it's basically, well, 6 days of the week, yes, I'm on screen, but it's going to be other people as well. And so for me, it's like all about the social thing and what's the purpose of this. And in some ways, this show is kind of a reflection of my life. And I feel like it'll be interesting going back 10 years' time, especially if I keep it up when I go to Thailand. I could imagine me doing not a long thing like I currently do, but maybe a quick, hey, here's like what I'm eating and I'm going to tell you about this food, or just like those daily snippets, or like, hey, this is the board game cafe in Thailand. And, you know, you can tell the fact that I'm going to Thailand by virtue of the fact that, you know, Kwang, for example, that I'm having on Saturday, I wouldn't be having them on if it wasn't for me going to Thailand. But then, you know, there's different topics like Fridays. It's like, okay, everyone come in. But getting back to the point, and like with your show, would you like people to jump in like in October's season, like the start of that season? Because hey, new season. That's what I assumed when I skimmed back, and I was like, okay, that's the recent season.
Fine. Yeah, definitely. We actually added an intro onto episode 1, saying, okay, this is the point where, like, episode 31 is where the audio definitely gets a lot better. So if you don't like the audio issues, feel free to skip. But I usually recommend people to start off with a mini series that's only 6 episodes long. So that's where I usually suggest that people start, because it's not as, like, it's got the overarching story going through it, but it is not a 75 episode monster that's really daunting to look at when you start it.
Yeah, that's a good shout. You want to have some jumping on points. Yeah. And a quick bye for Jolyn. It's lovely to see you, and I hope that your workday goes well. But we are just now going into the main topic, and feel free to comment, ask questions, and let me remind everyone that Bez and Friends Game Day will return on January the 9th. We're going to have Rory Muldoon showing off Scora, Alan, Paul showing off March of Progress, and we're going to have a few games from different people that I really love. But for now, let's get into the topic of RPG podcasts. What are they? Yeah, let us know, Dragon.
Okay. Well, I suppose you can have 2 forms. You can have discussion podcasts where you go over like how you would play this particular system. some of the new developments, like especially so the market is massively dominated by Dungeons and Dragons. So you will get people doing episodes when they have like a new book coming out, a new piece of content. And the other category is actual play podcasts, which is what we do, which are essentially audio recordings of a group playing an RPG. And personally, I prefer if the audio is edited a bit. I just feel like there's so many. Everyone always has gaps when they're thinking, like, oh heck, how do I deal with this thing? What's my best way of solving this puzzle? So it just cuts out the gaps, makes it easier to listen to. And there's such a massive range. There are so many actual play podcasts.
So within the discussion podcasts, I know even within that, there's a big variety. I started off listening to Who, What, Why, which touched upon board games, but was actually primarily about RPGs, at least in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you start listening to Who, What, Why, if you're more into RPGs, I would recommend you go back to the very start, because the first maybe 1 or 2 seasons, the person who ran it, we were talking about, hey, you made this thing. Well, how did you do it? And what were you trying to do? And let's have a chat about this thing that you made, which I think is really lovely. And then I eventually got to be on the show, I think, just last year. And this was like a really lovely moment for me, because I've been listening to it since like 2014. But it has slowed down, as a lot of podcasts tend to do. I mean, I guess that's another thing. Like some podcasts, they have a schedule and then they stick to it. Some others, it's... And why do people do these podcasts? Like, why do you do... why did you start?
So we started actually kind of by accident, and it's all snowballed from there. So originally, we were a group of friends that met on a WoW guild at World of Warcraft, and there wasn't very much content at that point in time, so we decided to start running an RPG game, and we initially recorded it for the other people in the guild to be able to listen to if they wanted. And then we decided to start releasing it. So people seemed to enjoy it. So we're like, okay, we'll edit it and release it properly and see if anyone else likes it. And it has absolutely spiraled since then. We're now on, like, as I said, nearly 270 episodes. I think we're on series 8, plus a lot of one-shots. And we go to different conventions, we take part in different things. We've done collaborations with a whole bunch of other actual play podcasts who have been wonderful. And it's just growing. It's also been really helpful, like for myself with my health conditions, because it's work that I can actually do that fits around my health. Like 90% of it I can do on my phone. So even if I'm laid up in bed that day, I can still run the social media, respond to queries, organise having other people in to record with us. So like all of those things I can work around as needed. And also it stops me from getting really bored, which is definitely helpful.
I find it really interesting how you mentioned you edited it and then released it properly. Because honestly, the reason why I do streaming rather than an edited thing is because I want to make it take less time. and I want to skip that entire thing. And it's like, yeah, why not do it live and have that joy of people interacting? And I don't know how to, I was inspired by Mark Rosewater's Drive to Work, where Mark Rosewater back in the day, I mean, now they're on their computer because they're not physically driving to work because of, hey, COVID. But back in the day, it would be, okay, I'm driving to work, and then on my way back from work, I listen to this show, and if it's good, then that's it. I will put up that show. If it's not good, if it's like bad enough, then I will just re-record the whole thing. And Mark literally never did any editing. And I think there's something nice about that. And I enjoyed listening to it. So I was like, well, I'm enjoying listening to this unedited show because of the value of the topic. And so maybe there is value in other people having that thing. And it depends what you're trying to get out of it. But I don't know if it is a double standard, but for sure, I would personally prefer to watch a short review of a thing, at least unless I'm really curious about that thing, rather than a long one.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's going to have some personal preference in it. Personally, I think we will always go with editing. Not least because RPG sessions can take 4 or 5 hours. And honestly, I don't know if many people would listen to 5 hours of a group of random people playing a game when you still have like the massive silences. When we go on tangents and just start talking about random stuff, we do save all of that content. It does get released. It just doesn't get released in the middle of a storyline. And it's different from like groups that stream and I think it's probably easier for streaming groups because there's more of that interaction. But I don't think I wouldn't be very happy to record it and then just release it as opposed to doing it live, if that makes sense. Yeah. There's also a couple of members of our group that I wouldn't trust near a live microphone because
swearing.
We are not a family-friendly podcast. Swearing is, frankly, we're from Glasgow. There's a lot of swearing. Okay. And it's more that every so often someone will phrase something in a way that sounds absolutely terrible. And I feel that because we are releasing the podcast, we're a publisher. And you have responsibility about what gets put out and whether the way something's worded could be hurtful to anyone. So some stuff just needs edited out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between offensive or shocking language and actual hurtful language.
Yeah, and if it was something that was said deliberately, that person wouldn't be a part of our group anymore. But there is, and so occasionally we have language issues as people like talking in their second language, and it's really easy to phrase something really badly if you're not aware of like how a particular set of words also have this other meaning that's really bad or really unpleasant. And it's like, yeah, it's fine. We'll edit that out for you.
I mean, just to take a step back, because not everyone knows what Penance RPG podcast is, could you give a quick 1-minute description of?
Okay. We are an actual play podcast. So the recording is us playing an RPG. We usually play homebrew, which means it's not a published system. It's one that is pared back. The rules and the character sheets are pared back quite dramatically, because we find it makes it faster and more interesting for the storytelling. It means that there's an awful lot more like story content per episode. And we have a bunch of different series. We, as I said, are not family friendly. We wouldn't be rated 18. Occasionally we have American collaborators ask like what sort of rating it would be in their system. And I always say that in ours, we would probably be rated equivalent to like a 15 film. Like there is some violence, but it's very cartoony violence. We tend to not be massively graphic for things like that. There's lots of story. It's very comedy heavy. There are dramatic storylines, but mostly we play things for laughs.
And there's a lot of silly voices, there's a lot of character building and a bit of weirdness. And so you will grow to know these characters the more you listen through.
Yeah. Although we do have quite a lot of characters change. Well, one of our players gets through a lot of characters. He also has about 3 different accents that he can do. So you get recycled accents a lot with him.
Okay, so it's like, hey, wait a minute. Why do these two... Okay, it's just because of human limitations. That's fair. I mean, we've got a question about how much of a difference it makes to the audience editing a podcast. And I think when Dragon's talking about, well, the final output is maybe 2 hours, whereas the unedited thing might be 4 or 5 hours. I mean, that is naturally going to make a big difference to the tastes of the audience. But whether people would listen to it or whether there's an audience for that with all the pauses, I mean, who can say?
It's so difficult to... Thing is that listener numbers can vary for any number of factors, especially like if there's a holiday. So Thanksgiving was last week. Thanksgiving, our listens were really low because people were doing things. So it's really difficult to work out which changes make a big difference to the audience. And as I'm sure most other creatives have as well, it could be difficult to get feedback. So you don't always know what makes a difference.
I think Alan wants to know, how exactly do you record this? When you're playing, do you do the actual playing over audio only, or how do you play?
Yes, we do audio only. So we play theatre of the mind is what it's called in RPGs. We have recorded for other groups with other people running it using websites like Roll20, which allow you to have maps up. It has like all your dice rolling in the browser. What we usually do is we record over Discord, because it's a really cheap way of doing it, basically. We've already had a couple of Discord servers for like the World of Warcraft guild, so it was really easy to just open up a new server for us to record in. It also, I think it probably helps because you ask, if you don't have a map, you will ask more questions about, okay, what's the layout? How many doors are there out of this room?
And it helps put you into the same shoes as the listeners. And presumably that's going to really help, because you're not going to be focusing on, okay, now I move one space away from the monster because that gets me into the better range of still being able to cast my spell. It's more like, okay, I'm going to converse about this person who has no idea what money is. And Yeah, then this is this slightly surreal conversation that hooks people in and makes them want to keep listening. I mean,
Yeah.
Talking about editing, Alex, who's says, do you ever ask someone to completely re-record? For the record, they once tried to edit something for my old internet radio show, which I'm going to at some point try to re-upload as a proper podcast so it's more accessible, and with maybe a little bit of intro to put it into context. Was that the one with Jamie Stegmaier where there were really bad audio issues on Jamie's end? But yeah, do you ever actually just flat out say, please re-record this entire thing and maybe say it again without swearing, or say it again a bit better or whatever?
It is very tempting at times. Usually the only thing we re-record for our episodes are introductions, or like closing, like a conclusion at the end, because then it's usually either myself or Nikolai who runs our games, and it means that it's just one of us doing a bit of recording, and it's really easy. Some of the other podcasts that we're quite close to will re-record lines. And so there was a podcast called Pretending with Dice, who do mini series, and every time it's a different RPG system. They did a Star Wars series, but they got some of us in to voice some of the parts. So running it, AJ said the lines so that the characters could react while they were telling the story, and then like he would give me the line to record for him, just so it was like in a different voice. So I played an android in that, which was quite fun. She was a very sarcastic android, so yeah, it worked quite well.
I mean, it's clear that you have a lot of fun and you're enjoying doing it. I mean, you talk about it being something that keeps you going and relieves your boredom, and I imagine that, yeah, honestly, like that's the main reason that I started doing this, to kind of be something to do and have some social contact. Do you think that it's similar to you? I mean, do you think we're similar reasons?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's also partly why like actual play podcasts are so popular, because it's like you're sitting in the room with a group of people. It feels very it kind of fills that social gap, but it also feels quite comfortable in a way that like not even like other entertainment podcasts can sometimes feel quite distant, especially if they're very polished. Very polished, very professional. It's interesting, you might enjoy it, but it doesn't necessarily feel like you're spending time with friends.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like, I asked people, and yeah, I did one for the 201st episodes, kind of asking people, hey, and also 200th episode saying, hey, why do you watch this? And I used to do this like every 25 episodes, which I think would be a good habit to get into, like maybe every 25th episode, if there isn't, something already there, then I might say, okay, this is a day when I kind of talk about streaming in some ways, because yeah, it's really interesting hearing a little bit more about why people listen, like why people listen to the things that they do, and why we consume. I mean, consuming of media, I hate that phrase, but yet, I use it myself, and why we watch the things we do or listen to the things we do, like why I listen to Mark Rosewatts or why I listen to Gil Hova, and and we need to make these difficult choices, because whilst I am enjoying your show, there's just all this other stuff, and I know and hope dearly that you don't take it as a slight that, I'm not an avid listener of Penance RPG.
There's so much. There's just, even if you only look at podcasts, there's just so many. There's always going to be things that you're interested in, that you might enjoy, and you just don't have time.
When you talk about the community, it makes me think of how people, when they're watching live, there is a bit of chat that isn't necessarily in you for the benefits of YouTube. I try to pop up the comments that I think someone watching this in a year's time will be like, okay, that's an interesting comment. That Manuel says, I've been finding podcasts hard to manage because there are so many good ones and they tend to be very long. But then there is also the little chat that goes on that I never flash up when people are saying, hey, everyone, and people say, hey, Jolene, oh, bye, Aqua, bye, Willcook. And, there's something lovely about that. And when I go into a new Twitch stream, especially in this day and age, if you aren't getting enough social contacts for your desires, whilst I'm not going to invite everyone to come around to my house for health reasons because, there's a pandemic and I don't want to create the viral infection. If that were not a factor, honestly, I would love people to just call on me all the time, pretty much. I would be happy for, my Twitter profile used to say on it, location, and then I had N15, feel free to drop in. And I genuinely meant that, not to literally any stranger, but if we've had some chat online, because we can become friends online, and genuinely, all the people that I'm starting, that have been watching so many shows, and it's okay, I'm starting to see how you conduct yourself, and I get the sense that you're a decent person, and I check out your Twitter, and I maybe see, you can definitely get a sense of who someone is. And if you're in the area when it's safe, when I'm in Thailand, if you're ever in Thailand, come over and I will have you over. Although it's probably cheap enough if you're based in Europe that you might as well get your own place for a night. But, for sure, come over and play games. And when I'm over there, before this whole lockdown thing, I was having people definitely every Thursday night, quite often, or other nights. Okay, hey, Layla, you don't have something to do? Please pop over. And but now, instead you're all invited around my digital house. And, Xate literally dropped in on me from, but it was, going in somewhere, I feel like I just can't get over how that social connection of saying hello and then hearing someone say your name for me, when I go into Jolin's stream or when I go into Amadeus' stream or when I go into Michael's stream or anyone, and then it's hey, and then they say, oh, but Beth says this, and there's some kind of validation of, yes, you are a human and I see you and you are worth, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely one of the things where recording the podcast has been really helpful for us, because we record every Wednesday evening, no matter what, mostly. Even if we don't record, if one of us isn't feeling too well, we usually have enough people that we can still record an episode. And if we don't, then we'll record something. It might be
a ramble,
a random discussion about things, but we still have that it's usually 2 to 3 hours at the moment. So we usually have that span of time of interaction. And because we're technically recording for the podcast, usually everybody can make it. Because it feels like it's we're doing this for a thing, so you have to turn, even if you're feeling antisocial, you turn up. And
it feels a wee bit more
90% of the time you enjoy it. So I think it's actually been really good for a lot of the cast as well, over lockdown.
And so for those listeners, I mean, do you know, like, why did these actual play podcasts, I would like to almost focus on them a bit more, because we can draw a lot more parallels between discussion RPG podcasts, because they're pretty much the same as the board gaming discussion podcasts,
Yeah.
right? Like, you've got stuff that's okay, reviews, or talks about let's talk to some artists, or let's talk about issues that are going on. And there's all sorts of ways that those discussions might happen, or talk to the designers. But when it's actual play, and as far as I know, in the board game space, there is, other than now I have new information that you've done it at least one time, but the only other person that I know that did it at all was Board Game Smackdown. And so, yeah, why are actual plays such a big thing? Why do people listen to this? And I'm going to say that personally, I don't even tend to listen to stories on podcasts. When I'm listening to podcasts, it tends to be discussion about board games, or discussions about mental health, or discussions about, hey, here's how to do a thing a wee bit better. But what is the appeal? I mean,
I think it's a combination of, it's storytelling, but it's collaborative storytelling. So there isn't like one person completely controlling the story and how it goes. And I think it helps people feel more a part of the creative process of it, because you can hear when people are like, I'm going to do that. Oh, wait, no, that's a bad idea. I'm going to do this other thing that completely changes the outcome. I think partly the organic feel of it works for people. It can also be really difficult to try and find an RPG group. Trying to find a group of people with someone who's willing to run the game, with a group of people that will reliably turn up, and that you're all free at the same time to play a game, is really difficult. So it's one of the things that can help scratch that RPG itch, essentially. If for whatever reason you can't get to play it, then you can feel like you're still involved in that sort of game with an actual play podcast.
Yeah, and if for you gathering people to play an RPG is indeed like herding cats, then you can live vicariously through an actual play podcast. And I guess there is also the sense of you listen to someone else and you get a good sense of how they GM. Like, you can maybe pick up tips. You might think of, oh, that's a storyline that I might use. That's a really good hook. And oh, that's an inspiration for a story that I might expand, because it's interesting. I would say a lot of RPGs have really interesting ideas. Like, whereas if you look at a TV show that's really polished, like let's say Modern Family, because I'm currently watching maybe a few episodes a week, and okay, it's really polished, I know what's going on with it, but let's be honest, there's no crazy new concepts in that. Whereas, yeah, the episode that I'm alluding to in your thing, the character that, it's almost like a throwaway thing, but then it's like, oh, what comes up with it? And it's like, why doesn't this person know what money is, even though they've been working in this pub for 10 years? And it's like, hey, there's so many, and that maybe launches your mind into, hey, what if this were, it could have been this, it could have been this. And because there's got to be some mystery almost in an RPG. Do you agree? Like, for the players to discover. It's not like on the comfort, surprise, and then completion, the surprise and has to be, whoa, what's going on? And the completion might be, okay, I've now worked out what's actually going on. Whereas in a comedy, in an American sitcom, it might be, okay, the surprise is that this show, this character's having another little spat with their sibling, which isn't even that much of a surprise. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's just like, and then the completion is like, okay, now everyone's hugging again, or it's back to normal and the equilibrium. But yeah, and so maybe that sense of surprise actually almost gets people more excited, and
It's very much it's not a sort of thing that would work if it was too scripted. It just it grows organically, and I think it does. I think it probably does help because a lot of people who play RPGs are like it as because it is collaborative. You're not being told a story. You are part of making a story. So, and you take turns. Everyone should have a way of getting involved. And if they're not, then the person running the game will gently pull them back in, check if they're okay, before gently pulling them back in. It feels like community, even if you're playing with a small group. And I think because that's something that a lot of RPG players like, it's probably an advantage for actual play podcasts because it's already a group of people that are interested in that sort of, like, spending time in that sort of way. I have to agree with the comment about herding cats. Even recording our podcast is occasionally like herding cats, but that's okay.
I mean, so looking into the future, and looking at how actual play podcasts have developed, because I mean, do you think that, I mean, one thing that stuck out to me is that there's no intro as such, really. There's the introduction of the players, but there's no hey, this is it, this is a show, and this is what we're going to do today on this show, which is something that Mark Rosewater, who comes from a communications background, is really good at on their show, saying, hey, this is my show, and today I'm going to be interviewing blah blah blah, and that's what the show's today is about. And then you've got, okay, that's what the show, or hey, today I'm going to be talking about how we've managed to play test remotely given the COVID situation. And okay, that's a really interesting topic. Now I definitely want to listen to this one. And let's say, okay, this is the story so far. This is it. It kind of, imagine if we had a Doctor Who style. Okay, last week we did this, and that sort of show. I'm not saying you need to do whole next week. This is what's going to happen, because that. But do you think that would help people at the start? I mean, do you think that having too much of that would take away from it, or is that just a thing that you've just not had the energy to do?
I think it's, for us, it's something that we did in our big series, our last big series, which was Plummet. We did it like as a narration style, like as though their actions the previous week were being like written down in one of the great books of this fantasy realm. So we would have a narration of what had happened the previous week. With some series, it feels like it fits because the story is very important. With some other ones, it just kind of turns into chaos. So I think it really depends on what sort of feel it's got. I think it's definitely useful for some of them. Like Plummet was heavily inspired by Descent 2nd edition, which is a great board game. We've never got to the end. Like, we started the campaign several times. We've never completed it. We get over halfway and then the group falls apart. But so because it started off in that sort of world, and it had broadly a storyline that we then completely changed. We did have it with the narration and like what happened last week. A proper introduction is something I've considered.
Like even saying, although it might be difficult, especially if you're in the middle of the campaign, saying, okay, this is episode 6 of a 7-part mini-series, or just so that if someone's not reading it but listening, then they have like maybe 20 seconds where it's like, okay, this is episode X of about this many, and it's going to be this sort of tone. And now we get into it.
Yeah, it's something that we can definitely, I'm very happy to look at again, certainly. We can't always say this is episode X of how many, because usually we haven't finished the series before it's being released. We usually try and have a couple of episodes recorded with, like, as well as the ones that are going out that week. But we have in the past ended up where we're recording on a Wednesday and that recording is released on the Sunday.
Wow.
And that is very, very difficult to do the editing in time.
So yeah, it could turn into something like Sate mentions. This is episode 31 of what we thought would be a 7-part miniseries. But it turned out to drag on and on and on, so who knew?
RPG storylines always take longer.
The thing, I'm no stranger to this myself, and like last Sunday, I started off saying, okay, these are the games that we're going to review, and then someone's finger got sliced off. So we had to, someone stopped recording because, some things are more important than reviewing games. And then it was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to review a couple more things on my own. But we'll get back to the other 3 another day. And if someone's watching this after the fact and then they're looking through and they're like, hey, wait a minute, why did Bez never review Zombie Tsunami? Well, they're going to be disappointed, but I'm sure that that's the nature of doing it live. And even in your thing, even though it's not a stream, people are kind of listening to it as it happens. And then do you ever get listeners actually influencing the story? Like listeners saying, hey, how about this? Or have you considered this? And then one of the players saying, you know what, I'm going to take up that suggestion. And then they actually run off and do that thing for the next episode.
It has happened, yes. One of our Patreon tiers is actually includes for patrons to be able to design an NPC, so a non-player character, that will appear somewhere in an episode. But we've also had, because we have a Patreon Discord server, and we have had suggestions and conversation in there turn into a character. That's usually for Belry. He's the one that gets through all the characters.
And it sounds like even though it's asynchronous, there is an element of a reciprocal loop and a symbiotic relationship. Okay, I'm going to address the chat. This is clearly untrue. You don't need to wear safety gloves. It says, so if you play with Bez, they want to win wildly enough, you should wear safety gloves. Alan in chat says, finger cuts off, darn, I missed that one. I mean, for gosh sake, it shouldn't be like, oh, darn, I missed it. It should be, darn, it happened, for goodness sake. But it wasn't finger cuts off. It was like a tiny nick on the end of Chris's partner's finger. Anyway, Manuel, Zombie Tsunami replaced by Fingered Tsunami. This is completely not true what Alex is saying. It was not grotesque. And Xate says Xate takes one day off, and this kind of happens, and 2 stores sharp knives in board games anyway. The new dexterity elements in Power Grids. Look, it's not an exciting thing to go back and rewatch for that. It's just that a thing happened. It was an emergency off camera, and Chris had to head off because it was like, yeah, this thing has happened. You know what? This is more important than us reviewing. Just go. And but by the same token, I'm not going to say it's happened with you. Like you have to explain away your this player's missing. Like, okay, I guess we run them as an NPC, or we suggest how they're missing from the story for that week, and then either way, it's going to, mess potentially with the pre-planned story. So as you say, the DM doesn't know. But yeah, looking forwards, how have they developed, and do you think that they will continue to be a big thing in the future? Like, yeah, actual plays.
So. There's still a lot, or RPG podcasts tend to have a lot of turnover. There's a lot, you tend to see a lot of them starting. Most of them stop around 6 months because it's, especially if you edit, editing is a lot of work. Keeping to a schedule reliably is a lot of work. But it seems to be that once a podcast gets past the one year mark, they seem to be like fairly stable and long running. Listener numbers and like follower numbers on social media are definitely still going up. There does seem to be enough of an audience for quite a lot of these podcasts to survive. I think the ones that do published systems have an advantage. If you do D&D 5th edition, you need to have something that makes you stand out because there's a lot of competition. And while it's not a zero-sum game by any manner of means, people can listen to any number of podcasts they like. But again, each person only has so much time in a day. And there's way more content being released daily, weekly, than anybody could get through all of it. Especially because there's new podcasts popping up constantly, and then there's other ones disappearing. And then, of course, you've got the big guys. And so you've got Adventure Zone, you've got Critical Role. As far as I'm aware, their numbers are, still growing as well. And it's things like that have definitely drawn more people in to actual play podcasts. I don't really see them disappearing, like as a genre. I don't see them disappearing anytime soon, certainly. Partly because it does have that social aspect to it, which I think is something that can help give shows longevity. But also, people enjoy it. Fun things happen, like fun, unexpected things happen when you play RPGs, and it's unpredictable enough that it keeps the interest. And as long as people want to listen, we'll keep recording.
And if I may ask, year on year, because you've been going on 4 years, basically 4 years at this point.
Yeah, we're
birthday in March.
Yeah, we're nearly 4. We'll be 4 years in spring. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, wait. February. I'm just poking around on. And so, were you conscious of this 60th episode when it was like, oh, we managed to make it to episode 60? Yay for us! We managed to, and I know that someone else who's doing a webcomic said, oh yeah, the average is 30 days. And so when I made it to 30 days, I was like, yep, I'm now going to try to double the average and see how I get on. And but year on year, are you continuing to grow?
Yes, we are. Our listens for like November this year. Well, I'll go back to summer because it's an easier comparison. So most years we try to have a second series running in summer. And this year we didn't manage it because we usually start it in like February, March. And of course there was a massive lockdown and everything was up in the air. So, but this year we've had the same or higher listens for a single series being released each week than we had for 2 series. So 2 episodes in a single week last year. We don't pay for advertising. Our Patreon covers our hosting costs plus a little bit more. Things are definitely like still growing. But then like the social media side and the marketing side, that's all my problem to manage. So that's more the side that gets a lot of my time going to it. So it's things like we do giveaways when we hit like a certain follower number. So instead of doing it as like round numbers, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, we did it as 1111 followers. And so our last one was in the summer. So we're going to soon have a 10K giveaway. So we're at 9,500 followers on Twitter at the moment. Definitely things have slowed down a bit this year with the pandemic. But I know that I've been doing it as well. I'm just not consuming the same sorts of media and entertainment as I would normally. So usually I would have like the radio on a lot of the time. And at the moment it's just, I'm just refusing to listen to the radio. I've either got podcasts on or I've got YouTube running. Just because it's escapism, essentially. And I think that's become more important for people this year. And it's something that is always fairly reliable to fall back on as well.
I think that's the thing. Like, people talk about escapism like it's a bad thing. And for sure, if you end up completely ignoring the real world, then it is. But I think that we need to have a respite. We've got a couple of questions. Alex, a quick one. Do you plug your Patreon at the beginning of the podcast?
No, only at the end.
The other thing that Manuel asks is it a common thing for actual play podcasts to create a compilation of best bits? I found a few of my favorites in other topics thanks to these compilations of best bits, because it's like, oh, that seems to have potential.
Mm-hmm. Not that I'm aware of, but it's a really good idea. So I'm going to take a note of that. Quite a lot of podcasts will have their own website, and they'll probably, the things that they feel show them off best will probably be available on there. But I don't know of any, especially with like episodes that are compilations. Certainly not compilations of like scenes from the actual play. You've got some people who do similar to us, where you've got like all the tangents and things, mic check questions, where that will get put into a compilation. But I don't know of any that do it with actual play scenes.
I mean, the scenes would have to be not too short. So you can't just have 30 seconds snippets, but maybe like, 5-minute snippets and have like 10 of them together for a 1-hour show. That's okay. The 10 of our favorite 5-minute-ish snippets. Because that feels like a reasonable length, 50 minutes for a, hey, if you've never listened to our show before, listen to this. I wanted to ask, so we've already talked a bit about why people are listening, about that escapism, about that social aspect, about living vicariously for other people if you want to play RPGs, and just about the story, about like the characters that, but what differentiates a good one from a bad one? I mean, I know this could probably take up tens of hours on its own, but can we hit a few key points? I mean, funny voices, is that like a good thing?
I think variety in voices definitely helps. Decent audio quality is probably one of the biggest things that makes a difference to how people listen or how much of a particular show they can listen to. If something has a lot of hiss or a lot of buzz, it can get really tiring for your brain, essentially, to hear that constantly. So you might want to chop and change more if you've got audio issues. A variety of voices, I think, is always good. There are quite a lot of RPG groups are still very heavily male dominated. They're just, that particular group happens to have lots of guys, which is fair enough. We've always tried to have a 50-50 split, male-female, but also we don't particularly go into people's gender identity in it. Like, as long as we've got a variety of voices that sound different, that's fine. Again, I think it helps break up the monotony a bit.
And now that you're recording online, would you be open to, do you think that it's worth reaching out across the globe? Because, I mean, with you peeps, it's very much Glasgow focused, right?
Only myself and our GM, Nikolai, live in Glasgow. We have, I have two friends from university who are currently recording with us in 2115, which is our newest like long series. So they're both Scottish as well. So there's 4 Scottish voices at the moment. We have, in previous series, we've had people from all across England, from India, Sweden, and South Africa. The only problem with international recordings, essentially, is time zones. So we do a Halloween project every year where we write a scenario and we do it almost like a choose your own adventure book. So a group has, like, you've got 3 options of places to go to during Tuesday morning slot. You can only go to one of them. You have to agree as a group. So we get guests. We get like other podcast casts on as guests for that. And a lot of them are American. America's got such a high population. A lot of them end up being American. But this means that we start recording at 1 a.m. our time.
Wow. No, that's
really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I would almost feel like the people who are doing it regularly, you kind of have to dictate a reasonable time for you. I've done a couple. I did a really late night recording to go on to that Breaking Into Board Games podcast, because that's a podcast that I really love. And I was like, you know what? If I need to stay up until 2:30 to be on this show, yep, I will do that one night. Because that's like a once, like, it's one of those things that there's not that many podcasts that I would stay up that late for. It's like once a year I will do something like that. But if I know that I was actually going to mention Stephen Bonacore, former head of Stronghold Games, has been talking about how they really love what's Emma's Emma Parrot, Emma. They've got Leyland Steele, those party, the Incorrigible Party. That's the one, Incorrigible Party. So, Incorrigible Party. So Stephen Bonnecor's been on that show and was saying, "Hey, I'd really like to be on more actual play RPG podcasts if anyone wants an NPC for just one episode, and I can come on and do some silly voices and be an NPC, but I don't have to commit to more than one, then please get in touch." And now that Stephen Bonnecor's basically retired, maybe they will come on at some more UK-friendly time. I don't know. Maybe it's worth getting in touch.
We really like having guests on. It sounds so it has a difference, so it's more interesting for listeners. But I think it's also really good for our GM because Nikolai runs almost all of our series. And I think it's really good for him to have a group that works in a totally different way to us.
Just to shake us up.
Yep, exactly. So for Halloween, he always tests it on our regular group first, which is why we always fail the scenario spectacularly because we're there as a break test, which is fine. It does mean that most of the other groups sound amazing in comparison, like how they actually deal with the story.
Oh, and a quick hello to Millie, who just gave us a raid. We are winding down, but we are just talking about what makes a good RPG podcast and what differentiates it from a bad one. And so thank you so much for that raid. And hello, Bourbon Bicky. It's lovely to have you. And feel free to join the chat and tell us, because were you streaming an RPG earlier today? What were you up to? And what do you think makes a good RPG stream? Because, I mean, I was talking about this on Twitter earlier, and Millie was talking about the board that Millie listens to. And so, and Millie also runs a couple. They were playing Alien Isolation, apparently. But, yeah, what do you think makes a good one versus a bad one? Because it seems to me that so much of this, like you were talking earlier, Dragon, about how high production values, you'd think, okay, that makes it better. But actually, that can take away from the friendliness and the charm. And maybe parts of it's like, I don't know.
I think there's definitely a balance. You need to be careful that you don't take out too much of the soul of it when you edit. But at the same time, I don't know how many ums and ahs people can, want to listen to after a while, especially because actual play episodes can be quite long. It's very much you question it every single time, essentially. You have to be quite conscious with what you're doing. I agree with that comment from Bourbon Bicky. If things are really complicated, I think it can pull you out of the story too much. When things are flowing like at a good pace, which can also be helped by editing, it's much easier to stay engaged with it. I think it's quite easy for something to just sound off and to pull you back out of the story.
Overcomplication in mechanics, maybe even overcomplication in how many characters there are in one scene. Because if there's too many people, you start losing track of what's going on. Or maybe even overcomplication in terms of the story. Like if you're trying to, like if the story loses focus. I mean, there's overcomplication in all sorts of manners. This is like a really broad reaching,
It's very much you're trying to keep a balance between all sorts of things. And that's partly something that comes from experience. It's not really instinctive to know where you draw the line between all these different things. And it might be different in different episodes, or different depending on who's running the game. And some formally published systems are going to need a different decision making. A lot of the free league games play differently to D&D 5th edition. So they have a different feel to them. So you would make those cuts at a slightly different point.
Yeah.
And it's something that we do quite a lot because we do different series. So we've got our current one, as I said, is quite futuristic. It's post-apocalyptic. So far, we've had very few character changes in it. Whereas Plummet, the one based around Descent, it's very much like an old school feel hack and slash type roleplay. So you get lots of characters die, characters are retired. So you get more variety.
It's almost like a cop-out answer, but what I'm hearing is that it is all contextual, and that you have to kind of somehow tell people, okay, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get this adventure where there's a lot of fighting, or okay, this is an adventure where it's a bit more of an intrigue, or hey, Penance is generally quite a light thing. You're probably going to laugh at some parts of it. We have a bit of a giggle, like kind of because if I come to a show and I'm expecting something sad and I get something happy, or vice versa, like either of those two things, I think that when I talked about what is a good game or what's a good whatever, the more I think about it, it is all about, I hate this analogy, but it is kind of about the marketing in that you need to signal. It's about that signaling and being able to say at some point, this is what you're going to get, setting those expectations correctly, and then meeting those expectations.
A lot of that also comes from not just the audio itself, but things like the logo that's used for it. So we did an adaptation of Out of the Abyss, but we played that storyline in our homebrew engine rather than the D&D way of running it. So like the logo for it's really dark, it's got silhouettes, it's got rather than being like a nice, clear, bright illustration of the landscape, it's got something that's quite dark and brooding. Because it's always going to be, or almost always going to be, a horror storyline. But also with obviously, because we were running it, it was going to have a different flavour to it. It was going to have the Penance flavour. And we are lucky enough to have a former cast member who makes all of our logos for us. So we've got someone who understands the type of game it's going to be when they make a logo for a new series. So it makes the marketing side so much easier because they know they've got a good understanding of what's going to work well with what we end up doing.
Yeah, that's a really good one because, I mean, when we think about the ethics of marketing, there is sometimes this guilt about, okay, but marketing isn't just about broadcasting and sending out this information loads of times, but marketing is also about what information and what signals and being mindful of what you're telling people and then making sure that that's the same as what you're actually putting out there. Like if I say, okay, Kids at Cataclysm, this is going to test your brain and you'll laugh with every card you play. You know, neither of those things are really true. I mean, you laugh sometimes during the game, so that gets a bit closer to it, but either of those things are kind of overstating it. And if I say, okay, this is a game, it's a quick game, it's chaotic, it's bit of a giggle, you get to be mean to each other, and there's a lot of cat puns, and that's basically it. And oh my gosh. Okay. Oh my gosh, I just can't. Okay. Now my mind is actually starting to ponder it. You've destroyed me. No. Oh my gosh. Okay, my mind is going. Yeah. I need. This has been a wonderful chat. I am going to start the recap in a minute. Yeah, we've chatted about lots of things. We've chatted about the different types of podcasts that's there. Oh my gosh. There are. Yep. We're going to have words, you and I. Yes. This is
just trying to distract you.
Okay, so we started off talking about Endless Realms and me walking around a lot. We started off talking about how podcasts are brilliant. And I was talking about ludology and other things that I really love. We talked about sharks. We talked about editing to get rid of those pauses and make sure there's nothing offensive. And also sometimes people have audio issues or language barriers and stuff. We talked about the fact that at least for Penance, it is recorded when people are just doing audio, and how matching the format in which the players are experiencing the game helps, those people who are viewing it at the end. Because if you are putting it up as a Twitch stream and you have a map on the screen, then sure, showing that map to the players might be a great thing. And then you show the map up on the Twitch screen as well, because you almost want to have a close relationship with the players and the viewers, if you're not the audience. And so by the same token, having those players only be listening, it's what the theatre of the mind. And when he talks about living vicariously, we talks about having that social aspect, having those familiar friends. We talked about the organic nature of it, and we talked about the feeling of continuity. Oh, and I want to just address this one comment on Twitter by Manuel, who says, I don't have the time or people to play an RPG campaign, but they sound interesting. So these podcasts seem like a way to access some of that, even while I'm working sometimes. But the long-running one sounds so daunting to catch up with. I understand what you're saying, Manuel. And, before we finish up, what would you say is, just addressing that part, what would you say is a good one-shot from Penance if someone is interested to listen to that after all this?
For one shot, I would probably go with... We actually have a cat game. So I would go with one of the all cat Traz episodes. Nice. It is a game where you're essentially a bunch of cats from the neighborhood, and you get into a house and you get trapped in that house, and then you need to react like cats. What are you going to do in this strange house as a cat? They're quite fun. I think they showcase the sort of chaos that we tend to have quite often. But it's also a one-shot. They're not massively long episodes either. And it gives you a good flavour of the sorts of things that we can end up doing. So I would go with one of them. They're fun. And you can also get, it's a one-page RPG, so you can access how to build your characters and run it from our website.
So as we get into the recap, do you have anything else that you think we really should have told people who might be interested in checking out some of these shows, or something that you would like to give some advice to someone who's maybe thinking of making an actual play podcast? We didn't talk about that at all.
One aspect that I didn't really mention and ties into some of the podcasts that you listen to is the mental health side. Again, it kind of ties into like the helping with feeling isolated and things. But I think the fact that there's escapism and there's something different is really quite beneficial for people at times. Escapism isn't automatically a bad thing, as you said. It can be the thing that helps to keep you sane, essentially. And sometimes you need to have a little bit of insanity to help balance out everything else. So they can almost be cathartic in some ways.
Yeah, and think about how things are going to tie into your life. And I mean, I would say that at the end of the day, it has to be, what's the point in doing this? Like, when you're listening to it, I mean, you know, you can be friends with me even if you don't listen to my shows. That's fine, I don't mind. And you can be friends with Dragon even if you don't listen to Penance RPG podcast. You know, it's not like we are going to come down and hunt you and say, why aren't you listening to all our shows? And like, it's there to be enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable, then don't be listening to it. And we got into that whole talk about Michael of that on Saturday, of that sense of completion. I think the same thing can apply to podcasts, that you shouldn't feel like you need to listen to every single thing just because you started. If you listen to half of them and you're like, hey, you know what, I enjoyed this, but it's a bit much for me. You know, it's not something that's bringing me joy to my life. You know, Marie Kondo, that stuff away. And yeah.
Just because something's published doesn't mean anyone has an obligation to look at it or listen to it, whatever it is. It's, if something isn't bringing you something positive, then you don't need to keep up with it. Just in that, in fairness, that's my philosophy in general with pretty much everything. If it's not strictly necessary and it isn't making you happy, then choose what makes you happy instead.
Oh, you've broken me again. And I had something that I really wanted to say. Oh yes, when you're making something, and I wrote this for someone else who asked me to contribute to a book, and they said, when do you give up on a game that you're making? And then like I really pondered that, and then what I ended up writing was that, am I enjoying doing this? Is this going to turn into something of value, or am I being paid to do it? And like, if none of those things are yes, then I stop doing it. And I got a couple of people to proofread, like there were a bunch more answers than that, and was like, well, what if one of them was yes? Well, if I am being paid to do something, then I'm kind of obligated to do it, even if I'm not enjoying it, and I don't think it's going to be particularly good. If you are paying me, I'm going to work on your game, even if I think it's a bit rubbish, and I'll do the best job that I can. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes, even if it's like that kind of, are you beholden? It's more, are you beholden to do something? And I guess payment, now I've kind of expanded that to, is there some sort of obligation? Now we can feel an obligation from the other people, from the audience, because for sure, like the fact that I'm trending upwards and like 10 people a day, you know, that's a solid number. Like I feel like once I'm getting like 10 live viewers, that's a lot. Like right now, I can see that it's 17 on the little number on my screen, where it's like 17 people right now excited to watch this and hear this. And like for sure, if I stopped, you know, I'm sure there would be some people who'd be disappointed. But at the same time, if it's causing me grief, it wouldn't be as good. I'm sure that people would rather kind of just carrying it on in a way that's true to myself. And even if you are being paid to do something, and I wish we had universal basic income, because then it would be a case of saying, you know what, I would like to be paid, but this is causing me too much pain. I'm not going to do it. And even without the world of universal basic income, there has to be a, you know what, this is causing me too much pain. And yeah, apparently if I stopped, say it would mostly miss Aqua. And yeah, I can't do that to the relationship. You'll find other ways to hang out. But I hope this has been a good show. This is where I kind of hate wrapping up, because I love, chatting to you so much. Dragon, it's been so long since I saw you. It feels like last December, something like that.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah.
It's so weird not having conventions.
I saw you last December, and even if I'm trying to work out whether it's okay for me to go to Glasgow for, winter holidays or not. And it's not even a holiday. I mean, people say happy holiday. That could be an entire different discussion. It might be more appropriate tomorrow, where we're talking about holiday games. But yes, shouts out to Paris Gondo from Released Podcast. And yeah, I'm just going to shout out my favorite Isle of Cats, where the Isle of Cats, but with, and yeah, catiforming Mars, maybe cat-forming bars, or no, that's a bit, yeah, like they're forming bars, like they're just turning themselves into little bar shapes, like into little fitting into things. Anyway, so look, this has been lovely, and I just want to say thank you, everyone. You've all been wonderful. Thank you, Dragon. Thank you for giving us your energy. It has been a wonderful chat, and I would love to have you on maybe in a couple of months or so, whenever you feel like you're able to jump on and kind of chat a bit more about everything and how you're doing, or join us for a group discussion if you would like sometime. Which those group discussions tend to be a bit more rigorous. If you want to find me, stuffabez.com, stuffabez.bigcard.com, twitter.com/stuffabez, instagram.com/stuffabez, twitch.tv/stuffabez. I'm streaming every day at 10 a.m. UK time and Tuesdays at 8 p.m. youtube.com/she/stuffabez for all the old episodes, stuffabez.com/discord. Oh dear, I just remembered, someone told me that my website isn't working yesterday, and I said that I wanted to take the rest of Sunday off. I need to double check that, and I might need to do some stuff, so maybe don't check out my website right now. I just remembered. But also, if people want to find you, how would you like to be found?
So you can find us on most social media. We have YouTube, we have penancerpg.com, which has links to pretty much everywhere. We are currently running a Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale on our Teespring, which again is linked to in all of the places. And if you became a patron, then you could join us on our Discord server as well. And if you follow us on Twitter, we'll be closer to that 10k giveaway.
And there is the Teespring thing if you want some fancy swag. And so, yep, thank you, everyone. Oh, wait. It was lovely having you as part of the chat. I mean, welcome to tomorrow. Yeah, possibly. Also, if you, again, I want to say over to you. What are you up to? You can share anything if you want to, and we have about 30 seconds, so jump in and fire in with things that you are excited to do. I'm excited tomorrow. That link might not be working, but tomorrow I am chatting with Ellie Dix, Alan, Paul, and Jessica Hancock about holiday games, games for Christmas, games for Halloween, games for all sorts of times of the year. Let's talk about them. And yeah, I'm going to run off to the post office after this because someone's ordered some stuff. Yay. So I get to run to the post office and get myself out the house. How about you, Dragon? What are you looking forward to?
I've got so I was bought some baking kits, so I have some shortbread dinosaurs to make.
I love that. Oh, Millie's got chores. Also, tomorrow is working on an RPG mystery on the publisher's Twitch channel. Sounds exciting. And excited that tomorrow Xate Spike is supposedly finally being delivered. That sounds awesome. And then Xate will be a bit more mobile. Waiting since April. Alex is learning Twine. And then, yeah, I mean, bikes are amazing. I mean, tomorrow we should talk about bikes, potentially. Or maybe we can talk about bikes on Friday. You can come on and you can just chat about your bike for 2 hours, Xate, if you want to, because Friday's the Friendly Friday forum where we just let anything happen. And I'm just going to see who is playing right now. Amadeus, not raided them in a wee bit. So I'm going to quickly type in raid, and that is some piano music if that's something that you'd like to listen to. Yep. Lots of love to everyone. You have been wonderful, and feel free to share, spread the word. The only thing left to do now is to say bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. And bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye.